Well, Singapore wants to centralise how the power sector buys gas to better guard against supply shortfalls and volatile electricity prices. It will appoint a new entity to combine gas demand and buy on behalf of the power sector. The news came at this year's Singapore International Energy Week. Chloe Chu with this report.
The global energy crisis of the past few years saw turbulent times in energy markets. High gas prices compelled power generation companies to cut back on their gas contracts. This led to big swings in wholesale electricity prices that hit the sector hard. But come 2024, a new centralized gas procurement framework might keep that from happening again.
This will create greater economies of scale and allow us to negotiate more favorable gas contracting terms, procure gas from diverse sources to reduce concentration risk, and enter into longer-term gas contracts to provide more stable prices and supplies.
The idea, in a nutshell, is to adjust a system where Gencos, seen here on the right, currently purchase imported gas directly from suppliers. The Gencos decide how much to procure and for how long based on their commercial interests, which may not be optimal for everyone. The centralized system would set up a new entity, or GasCo, to procure gas supply based on what all the Gencos need. And if that's not enough to meet electricity demand from consumers, the GasCo can add more. This way, businesses and households down the line can be better protected against volatile electricity prices from factors beyond their control.
This is a fundamental shift in our approach towards gas procurement, but we believe that this is necessary to create a more stable and secure power system that will ultimately benefit the consumers and the Gencos alike.
The Energy Market Authority says it will consult the industry on the details of the framework in the coming months. Singapore's largest Genco, Tuas Power, says the approach could help in times of uncertainty, but it also hopes for some leeway in terms of how Gencos can still buy their gas.
If the government can consider to have more flexibilities for the Gencos, that would be nice, because then if I can have some base load for so-called medium term, but then I have some flexibility for the short-term supply.
EMA says that global developments and the energy transition are likely to lead to more volatile oil and gas markets, which may further reduce the risk appetite of Gencos.
Singapore could become the first country in the world to use ammonia commercially as fuel for ships. 6 consortiums have been selected to test and deploy an ammonia power plant on Jurong Island, with hopes to decarbonise the bunkering sector. Ammonia is currently not recognised as a safe fuel, but Singapore hopes that findings from this project will help it better understand how to use ammonia and ultimately allow ship-to-ship bunkering. The 6 proposals identified will be further studied and launched before the end of this year. In a separate update, authorities say Singapore has also installed over 1 gigawatt peak of solar capacity, and it is on track to achieve its target of doubling this by 2030. While solar is currently Singapore's only form of renewable energy, the country is also exploring other sources like geothermal heat and biofuels.
As for nuclear energy, the Trade and Industry Minister says there is no decision to deploy it. But Singapore must keep its options open and stay on top of promising solutions.
We need to build capabilities to understand advanced nuclear energy technologies that are becoming safer and have the potential to be cost competitive. This way, we can study the options seriously when these newer technologies have become viable.
For more, we speak with Dr. Alvin Chew, he's Senior Fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at NTU. Good evening, Dr. Chew. Thank you for joining us. Minister Gan Kim Yong said that Singapore has yet to make a decision on nuclear, but that we have to keep our options open. Tell us why it is that it's so difficult to decide on whether Singapore should use nuclear or not.
Well, basically, I get asked a lot of times why Singapore needs nuclear energy. And my immediate response to them would be, why not? So I think, to be fair, it's a very difficult decision for any government to actually commit, because the nuclear energy actually requires a long timeline of commitment. I mean, from the International Atomic Energy Agency, the milestone framework, we know that typically a newcomer country like Singapore would require about 10 to 15 years to build up the capabilities before it can actually have its first plant built. And all we know is that within 10 to 15 years, there are a lot of viable solutions that can actually come up. And so that's why I think there's a lot of very deep political commitments that we need to make to decide on whether we want to go nuclear. And after that, when we have a nuclear power plant, we typically operate for like about a lifespan of 40 to 60 years, maybe sometimes longer than that. So it's very much different from like a gas or coal-fired power plant, whereby you operate for like 15 years and then you can dismantle it and then you call it, the kind of fly-by decisions. For nuclear energy, if you decide to actually decommission the plant, that would take another 20 to 30 years. So all in all, we are looking at about 100 years of planning decision, and that is why discerning decisions has to be made by the government. When it comes to
100 years, we're thinking
on average, yeah.
And you're talking about viables. And more than 10 years ago, there was a study, government-linked, which at that point said the tech available did not make nuclear suitable for deployment within Singapore. Yeah. Now, that's 13 years ago. In that time, tech changes, public sentiment also changes. Has anything happened to make this form of energy more feasible today in Singapore?
Yeah, definitely a lot of research and a lot of technology has evolved in the nuclear sphere. Basically, when we look at maybe around 2008, when we have our former ex-Minister Mentor Lee Kuan Yew says that nuclear energy is probably some of the solutions, one of the ways whereby we can, have energy security. And the question was then to put to us, where are we going to site a nuclear power plant? So over the years, we have smaller reactors that's being built. And what we mean by smaller reactors is that the size has actually come down. So in a way, the signature is much smaller and it's more manageable. And when we look at past nuclear incidents, the two main nuclear incidents that we have are like Chernobyl and the Fukushima that warrants the kind of global attention. And when we look at them, if we look at them carefully, it's actually, human error that comes into play. I think it's not to say that the operators are incompetent, but during a crisis, the operators, being human, they would tend not to make very sound decisions, and they don't know how to operate under stress. So what the technology has done over the years is to actually put in more passive safety features that actually allows less human intervention. It could be in the form of, let's say, maybe a nuclear power plant that actually detects some kind of anomalies during operation. They could just maybe shut down or send a signal to alert the operator to say, do you want to shut down, and things like that. So these developments has come over the years, and coupled with the smaller scale that's more manageable, it actually opens up a lot of opportunities for siting as well, where we can actually site a nuclear power plant. So all this coming together is also a possibility of why Singapore could actually look into considering nuclear energy as one of the possible options.
Well, Dr. Chew, we do have our net zero emissions targets by 2050. We already have sources of energy, even renewable with solar. What would using nuclear energy mean for Singapore in reaching that 2050 goal? Yeah,
I think net 2050 is a buzzword now on everybody's mind. Basically, the thing is that you cannot achieve net zero emissions by 2050 by taking, if not including nuclear into the energy equation. I think a case in point is that we have gone forward and planned ahead to actually decarbonize our transport sector by introducing electric vehicles. Then again, you can take the petrol off the carbon energy mix, but you're introducing electricity, and we ask ourselves the question, where are we going to get that electricity from? And if it's going to be generated by fossil fuels, then we are also introducing carbon emissions into the equations. Not all sectors relies on electricity, but at the same time, we could have maybe aviation fuel that actually requires hydrogen to actually fly the planes in the future. And there are so many ways whereby we can produce hydrogen nowadays, mainly relying on fossil fuels, but these are not clearly what we call green hydrogen. There are different spectrums of colors. And if you have hydrogens that's produced by coal, they are typically black or gray hydrogen. And if you put this kind of carbon capture storage mechanisms into it, it becomes blue hydrogen. So green hydrogen is basically generated via renewables, like solar is the only way we'll have. But then again, it's intermittent. So nuclear energy is one that can actually produce hydrogen, and they call it the pink hydrogen, which is carbon-free in the process of producing hydrogen.
And as you just pointed out, nothing is quite as simple as it seems. So you want EVs, but to produce the electricity on which EVs run, you could be creating more emissions.
Yeah.
Right. So when Singapore considers what it wants, net zero is just one of them.
Yes.
Also, jobs, economic growth. What are all the factors we need to think about when we move towards what our future should be? And that's not just net zero.
Yeah, I think basically when we talk about the future, I think climate change is really driving the global agenda right now. And when we talk about the future, it's all basically about the newer generation of people, getting them excited. And I have to say that at this point in time, people don't really know much about nuclear energy because of its past, related to nuclear weapons and also the Chernobyl crisis. And that's why people, perhaps among our generation, will think that there are other alternatives. And especially for a case like Singapore, we are not. Why introduce a risk factor when all the while we are okay with natural gas that's providing us? But the thing is, we need to consider a net zero whereby it's carbon free for our future generations to actually survive in. That kind of environment. And nuclear energy is just an integral part of renewables along with them. And for them to actually get, in the sense, to be educated about what nuclear energy is, I think it has to really start now.
Yeah. The accidents that you mentioned earlier aside, both for Fukushima, sort of perpetuated by a natural disaster there, and for Chernobyl, some complicit human error there. Those aside, nuclear energy is used elsewhere in the world efficiently, successfully, and so on. But that nervousness that you described there and the lack of knowledge or education about its uses, how safe it is or not, how do we actually mitigate that? And is there a certain demographic in Singapore with regards to who's more accepting of it or not?
Well, I think the demographics is not just only in Singapore because we are quite a progressive society. I think it reflects quite well generally in a lot of other countries as well, that the younger generations are more receptive to nuclear energy. I mean, I just came back from an international conference held in Vienna last month, and they are getting the Gen Zs to actually do TikTok videos as influencers to actually help to promote nuclear energy. And the message there is that if you want to engage the younger generations, you need to use social media platforms and things like that to actually make them feel that they are actually contributing to achieving the net 2050 carbon emission goals. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Chew. Dr. Alvin Chew there from S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at NTU here in Singapore.
Thank you.